right, here we are again for another week of the RPC podcast chat. We have a couple new users today. The first would be this incredibly wonderful 4-week-long growth of beard right here. As you guys can see, I'm trying to gain the dross scruff, and it's just not quite working.
Keep at it.
I'm debating, after a month, and this is as much as I get. I guess I can kind of give you see a little bit of that. Anyway, that's my unfortunate curse. I was chatting with my brother, and my brother was commenting, it's just part of our family. The men in our line have never been able to grow facial hair, so we've just embraced it. I'm going to maybe give it another couple weeks and see what happens, because I at least have a little bit of the molestache going on here. We'll see if that fits in a little better down the road. But
I'll stick with it. Mine didn't show up till mid-30s, so I was much like you in my 20s and early 30s too, so it's kind of late to show up.
I am in my mid-30s, so of course my dad said that for him, right, my dad said at 40 is when he started having to shave daily. So we'll see how that plays out for me. I might cut it this time, and 5 years from now, give it another shot. But we also have another user with us who is R Horizon. And he is, of course, somebody who I am extremely happy to have around the RPC parts. A lot of you guys know him just from either the Discord or from chatting generally. And he is the one who handles all of our technology. He made the fantastic opener video for us, which, of course, has contributed to some, I don't know what you would call it, criticism from time to time.
Some controversy, definitely.
Some whining controversy going on.
That's true.
Scantily clad controversy.
My favorite kind.
So, that being said, we're happy to have Horizon around. Levi will not be able to make it today, so our Horizon is going to cover our single guy perspective. And the topic today, I believe we're planning, actually, you want to introduce yourself, I guess? Maybe there's things you would want the group to know about that we haven't mentioned already.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a 22-year-old college student. I found RPC around 2 years ago, but actually ended up taking the red pill about 3 years ago, almost coming up on that. Lots of one-itis, lots of orbiting, all the full 9 yards. Went through it all, and I'm like, yo, this isn't working. Being a skinny 120-pound kid isn't going to get me any girls. So I had to take the red pill hard. So that's kind of how I got into all this, and then started realizing there's more important things, which the whole mission aspect. So that's kind of something I've been developing alongside learning about the red pill and, getting out there. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. Tell us, what is your mission?
My mission?
Can't hear that phrase without asking, right?
Right, exactly. So right now my mission, I've got a few. I've got a short-term mission, long-term mission. Right now my short-term mission is actually to bring in about 10 people under me and kind of changing a little bit of the college ministry atmosphere to make it more mission-oriented, to bring in that part of discipleship, which is so important. So that's my mission, is to make disciples, bear fruit, love others, love God, and fully, bring forth this kingdom and glorify God. So.
Very cool. It's going to be a little hard to do with Corona. Can you even attend in person with any length right now?
You know what? I am not sure yet. I'm going to reach out to some people, see what the deal is, but given what I've kind of put together in the past couple months, I'm pretty optimistic of the things I'll be able to do even without meeting in person. So I'll make it work.
Cool. Yeah, discipleship has really taken on a new look the last couple months, hasn't it?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
It's really had to change the way we interact and how we handle things.
Well, though, this is really good practice.
Too.
This is really good practice because there's going to come a time when this is going to be one of the only ways that we're going to be able to connect with each other. We're not going to be able to meet together freely for much longer the way things are going in this world. So God has provided online ministry and online connections so that we can continue to minister, continue to disciple, and we're at the forefront right now. And so this is really just a fantastic opportunity that not a lot of people are taking advantage of yet, and it is the future, especially when persecution comes and we have to go underground, which will happen at some point.
Unless you're a preterist like Oz and I. Anyway,
well, we'll have that discussion later.
We'll have that discussion.
All right, so let's chat some about desire, right? And so I've recently been kind of perusing The Rational Male again. And of course, he opens in the very first book with his talk on one-itis, and it moves in from there to the cardinal rule of relationships, right? Which is the one with the power is the one who needs the other the least. And then he goes off to address the idea that you can't negotiate desire. Right from the beginning, the ideas of, one-itis, how we as men tend to have this obsessive nature when it comes to women. And yet in the reality, as much as we may obsess over women with our one-itis, we can't control or cause them to desire us back through some kind of negotiated effort. What do you guys make of that?
Well, I think that it's a misunderstanding that most people, I think, in the church have to some variety or another. And the idea that you can somehow negotiate your way into your wife being attracted to you seems to be kind of a predominant paradigm, at least when I think about any marriage counseling I've ever seen or been a part of. Back before we got married, for example, my church required it, and they handed out some books that basically came down to, if you're a good husband and you do the nice things, then she's going to like you and she's going to reward you with sex. It's basically what some of the advice boiled down to. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And the whole point there is you're doing the whole covert contract thing, or even an overt contract, and it doesn't work because you can't force yourself to be desired to another person. It's either there or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the Brad Pitt experiment, the Christian Brad Pitt, right? Oh, if your wife is, frigid, she's not, wanting to have sex with you is the intention here to draw out. So you say, oh, well, what about the Christian version of Brad Pitt? Would she be interested in him? And the answer is, yeah, probably she would be. Well, kind of on the flip side, I like to think about it this way, and I've put this to a few guys and get the same reaction, is how much would Rosie ODonnell have to do to get you attracted to her on a physical level? Like, the answer is there's almost nothing that she could do. It doesn't matter how much money she has, doesn't matter how funny she is. None of that really matters, because on a physical level, like, it's not there. And so I think a lot of guys are going around as the equivalent of Rosie ODonnell, thinking, why doesn't she have desire for me? I do all these nice things. I make so much money. And it's like, that's not how this works. It's not how God designed it to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really one of the most fundamental or early red pill concepts that you internalize. And I think it kind of sparks a lot of guys to go into that anger phase. They realize that, my goodness, I've been lied to, through media and, the way I've been brought up, and even church and stuff like that, I'm supposed to just work harder. And that's how, that's how you build desire. And it's a pretty eye-opening realization once you internalize that. It's really one of the most fundamental or core concepts, if you will.
Well, there's that old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And I think the same is true with women. When it comes to this, you can convince them, but, well, is their opinion really going to change? Yeah, no, not if you're still the male version of Rosie ODonnell. Plain and simple.
Yeah, and I think the more you start waking up to some of the nature of women and you spend time around them, I know of a girl who she has a lot of interested guys in her life, some of which are extraordinarily wealthy and very successful, but she's not attracted to them. But man, can she fake it, and she gets all kinds of favors. It is unreal, because she will fake her desire toward them enough that they're going to be her walking ATM. But then she'll come and tell my wife about all the things that she finds repulsive about them. And those guys think they're winning, but they're getting scalped. And it's like, that's, I think, where a lot of anger phase comes to as well, is because these guys are thinking they're getting authentic desire, but in reality, they're getting this show to get at their wallet. And, it's, if you were to point out two different guys, right? One guy, he is very wealthy, he's very successful, and he has a bunch of women around him all the time. Or you have the guy who's a bum who doesn't make anything, but he also has attractive women around him all the time. Which of those guys is experiencing authentic desire? Like, we know. And so there's definitely a point in which your success can correlate with desire, but it can't replace the underwriting. That is, you have to also be physically impressive to a certain point. And I think that's one of the reasons why red pill thinking always starts with, you should lift.
So let me ask you from this perspective then, right? This is where the Rosie ODonnell parallel may not be ideal and perfect. Not to say that it's not a great example, because it definitely highlights some things about how we address sexuality in the reverse, and helps a guy understand, on the assumption that women are purely physical, right? But at the same time, we know that women and their attraction is not purely a matter of how hot a guy is, right? There is more that goes into it in how she evaluates his SMV than purely the appearance, which is what, men for the most part base everything off of. And so I remember having thoughts at one point in my marriage when I was struggling with my wife, and I would hear this advice of, oh, just get in better shape, because during those times I was pretty obese. But I also remember thinking in those moments, yeah, I tried that game. I worked out, ran my butt off, did a bunch of lifting, and I had gotten to that point where I was in pretty good shape again. And even though I was in great physical shape, that desire was still not there. What does it take to cultivate that beyond just the physical appearance and hitting the gym?
Congruity. So if you look like Chad, but you don't act like Chad, you're still not going to be perceived as Chad, at least not for very long. And so your wife living with you knew you, and it's not as easy to demonstrate attraction with somebody who gets to see you at your best and worst. And so I think that, yes, you have to work on your physical appearance, but if you're having incongruent behavior, you're going to still shoot that, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot that way until you can get your behavior congruent with your appearances. And I think that's part of the reason, and we talked about this, I think the last time we talked about lifting, was the big benefits are really mental in a lot of ways. It brings into a line your discipline and your resolve. It gets you past motivation, things like that. And so eventually, with the habits that you're building in the gym, along with the body you're building in the gym, your behavior outside of it becomes more and more congruent over time. It's not like a special, one-time pill and you solve all your problems, but I think it's certainly a foundational starting point because of that. What is a shit test? It's a test of congruity. Are you as you present yourself?
Spot on.
It's like that post you did a while ago, Oz. It was talked about how it's an upgrade to your operating system. Lifting helps you build that confidence and have the build the mental frame to pass those fitness tests.
Well, and I think there's a difference too between seeing evidence that you're better and knowing you're better, and your attitude and your body language and your interactions and your confidence reflecting all that. It has to be internalized. And that's part of being the prize. Until you're the prize, and that comes from within you, it's still kind of fake it till you make it. It doesn't have the same effect.
Sure. Something that comes to mind is you think about the poor college student who talks about how if they were a wealthy billionaire, they would be very philanthropic and they would always give away their money and they wouldn't be like one of those greedy 1%ers. And you go, okay, that's easy for you to say. You have no money. You have negative money. When you have money, tell me about what you would do with it, right? And so it's like the guy who's severely obese and he's got the neck beard and fedora and everything, and he looks like he's some Redditor, and he goes around and he's touting how great he is at being a virgin, or he, would definitely pass on these opportunities. And, there's this, okay, that's nice for you to say, but it doesn't really matter, because that's not ever going to be a temptation you're going to be faced with your current situation. So I think that, again, part of what is impressive about a guy who has actual means, whether it's physical or otherwise, a guy who can attract desires, if you show temperance, if you show some sort of resolve to do the right thing, it's going to mean more, because you actually have the opportunity to, and the ability to choose to do the wrong thing. And so I think that it magnifies the character that already exists beneath.
I like that.
Well said.
Definitely.
I'm reminded of, in Mere Christianity, I believe it's C.S. Lewis, has this part where he's talking about how some people challenge the idea of, oh, well, Jesus was God and he was able to withstand all kinds of temptation and struggle because, you know, he was God. He didn't have to deal with it, right? And yet at the same time, the argument that C.S. Lewis makes for why Jesus really can empathize in our struggle against sin is, he says, you know, when an army is attacking and you look at an army that's conquered halfway into battle and compare that to the army that is conquered to the very last man, right? And you're able to, or even the one who withstands the entire army all the way, right? The guy who comes out the victor has seen every single inch and ounce that the enemy can throw at him before he's finally able to reign victorious. Whereas the one who is conquered only ever gets to see a portion of what the opposing army has to come at with, right? And so it's this idea that you know, Jesus could understand our struggle and sin because he conquered it, meaning he dealt an even greater weight of the enemy's army and forces trying to tempt him than we ever would have. And in the same way, I think that it speaks to the strength of the man if he does have that ability to say, you know, I am a desirable man. I've got all kinds of temptation coming at me, but I can be the one to stand up against it, versus the one who you know, like you say, has no opportunity in the first place. And it's, you know, he just skirts the battle altogether because the enemy doesn't even fight him. They say, we're not worried about you at all.
So Mark, do you even lift?
Just got back from the gym a couple hours ago.
So as a single guy here and a Christian guy, what does it look like to attempt to cultivate desire in a woman you find interesting, or women that you find interesting? What does that look like?
So what I would do is I would have that independent path from kind of pursuing any women, right? So it'd look like, okay, I'm pursuing this lifting, right? That's the discipline part. But alongside the lifting, I'm also, you know, increasing my mental strength, right? And so having both of those in like congruency, like you said, moving those forward and being independent from even trying to vie for the eyes of a lady around you, right? I think that's kind of the path that I take in bringing in desire. Because I kind of think once you kind of ignore a woman, then she wants to, she's like, why is this guy ignoring me? And then automatically there's that desire kind of sparked within her, right? Rather than if you're kind of going up and showing yourself available, showing your wanting to pursue her in some way, then you'll be able to kind of cultivate that desire. At least that's kind of the frame that I kind of go along with right now. So it's basically, don't focus on the woman, right? Focus on your own stuff, move your own stuff forward in every way of physical and mental. And then eventually maybe someone's going to come by who is worth it. And then you can just kind of go from there.
So let's talk a little bit about the go from there part of it. And I just want to bring this up a little bit because I think that as we're talking about desire, we can't neglect to address the fact that not only are we interested here at RPC about female desire, but also figuring out our own, right? And so the prevailing wisdom is become valuable, and then they will basically go into pursuit of you. And that is good advice, and it's a great starting point. But is there room for, what if you see the woman and you desire her? So what then? Where does that then come into play? Or do you just kind of hang out in the corner and flex and, you know, be successful and just kind of like, okay, I hope she comes over here and talks to me. So, and this is kind of open to the group here. I'm not just picking on Mark, but I think that there can be an overemphasis on become valuable and kind of a de-emphasis on approaching. Because I think that, you know, there's a good reason to focus on the first for a long time until you get that under wraps, but then there is a place for approaching. So where does that come in?
I would say
We've
when there
talked
is
about
that
this.
person who is worth it, real quick. But so like when I see a job I want or a networking opportunity, right? You obviously wouldn't just stand by and let them come to you, right? Sometimes you need to be ambitious and put your foot out there, which is almost what I had to do in getting connected with John and stuff, right? I had to be like, hey, I have these skills. Can I help out in some way? Because I knew that getting connected in that way would help push me forward in other ways, which eventually is where I'm getting to, and actually being able to talk to John on a weekly basis. And that was my goal, right? And so when there is that woman who is worth it, who you see as valuable, who is just banging hot, right? Then I would say, okay, I think given the path I'm headed on now, I can be able to go up and approach and actually start to, play game in all these different ways and flirt, right? To actually try to win her over and make her just really wet over you, right? That's kind of how I see it. If I really want something, then you go for it and get it. And then if she rejects you or strings you along too much, cut your losses, move on, and continue.
Right. So looking at scripture, God drawing us. He creates the world, puts enough throughout nature that no man is without excuse. Romans 1, right? And so he cuts us off there and says, everybody knows I exist. I'm so awesome. I don't even need to tell humanity who I am because they can just see it through the way that I've created the world. And it's so amazing who I am that they're just going to want to come to me. And therefore, God never spoke to humanity, right?
Good point.
No, at some point, God puts out the invitation. And so he starts, with Moses, for example. Moses kind of had this idea of God, but as Moses is walking by on a mountainside, God appears to him in a burning bush and says, Moses, get over here. Let me talk to you, right? Or he confronts Abraham out of the blue and just says, hey, leave and why don't you come on over and search this promised land I'm going to give you? Or Jesus with his 12, right? They knew who he was. They're calling out good teacher even before he calls them, right? But at the same time, despite knowing who he was and how awesome he was, at some point he had to throw out the invitation. I'm going this way. You want to come along, right? And so if we want to follow Christ's model, there's got to be an invitation.
So let me go ahead and be the resident tulip peddler here, the Calvinist of the bunch. I take exception to the terminology of invitation rather than call. I don't think that Jesus can fail in his mission. And if you read John 6, it's pretty clear what his mission is. It's he came to save all that the Father had given him and to raise them up at the last day, meaning everyone who the Father gives, Jesus is going to save. There doesn't leave room for people to maybe I will, maybe I won't accept this call. Lazarus was dead. He didn't get to say, no, I'm going to stay in the grave, Jesus. So I think that it's a helpful lens to think about our relationship between, the human relationship intersexually with man and woman, husband, wife, etc., with the divine relationship between God and his people. But I don't think that that's a lens in which you can put everything through.
I can see from the Calvinist perspective that would make sense.
So, Reformed gang, you're welcome. I did want to also bring out the idea here, though, of, so approaching. So Mark brought up, if you found somebody who you think is suitable, you can approach them. And my challenge to that would be, I think that there's a lot of waiting that happens, thinking, okay, I somehow have to vet this person from a distance. And it's just kind of impossible to do, right? And so I'm a big advocate of, how to put this, I guess, promiscuous approaching, in the sense of it doesn't hurt to approach and get to know somebody. And so if somebody even strikes you as a little bit interesting, you're just prospecting at that point. If you think about the salesperson who they only approach and they only prospect clients who they think are going to say yes, they're probably not going to find that many clients, because that's not really what sales is about, right? They say if you can close like 2% of the 100 approaches you take, that's normally a pretty good rate in a lot of sales gigs. And so I think that the idea of like, well, they're hot, they're interesting, there's something I like about them, I'm going to go talk to them. And, of course, get to know them a little bit on that level can go a long ways to, one, just getting over approach anxiety, 2, building abundance, and 3, you'd be surprised at who you met. And part of the reason why I'm about this is that's how I met my wife. We were swimming at the lake one day. I looked at her, I was like, wow, she's hot. I'm going to talk to her. So I approached, and we're like 9 years from the fact now, and we've been married for going on 8, and that's how it all started. So I think that too much vetting from a distance can limit you.
But
Agreed.
at some point, there has to be some interest shown back too. Yeah, you have to put yourself out there, and it's good to talk with everybody. It's good to be the person that can strike up a conversation with anybody. And that's a skill that can be developed. It does take practice. It does take putting yourself out there and risking it. And once that happens, if you find somebody that you're looking at as a possibility, once you put yourself out there to a certain degree, I think you do have to see if there's any interest coming back. And if there isn't, you might be able to do something to cultivate that interest. But at that point, there's going to be a line where it's just either going to be possible or it's not. And it's going to be different for every person. Once you cross that line and you don't see the interest reciprocated to you, then you have a decision to make. And that's one thing I remember reading. I haven't read it for a couple of years, but Anti-Dump's Machine was a very good short piece of work about that, screening for interested candidates. Because there does have to be some reciprocal interest. You can only generate interest to a certain point, and then it has to be genuinely reciprocated. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, I think about it kind of like a sales funnel, right? Like each person progresses down the funnel to a certain point based on whether or not they pass certain criteria. And so I'd say cast a wide net, but then be selective from there. I think initially you approach because they're interesting to you, but at a certain point, they've got to be worth your time. And so that's where the vetting comes in after the fact. But I think that sometimes we wait, and I think Christians especially have this weird culture, and I'm not saying this is true of every church, but a lot of churches have this culture that exists where it's kind of like, oh, if you go on a date with this person, like, when's the wedding supposed to be scheduled? Like, there's this very high degree of commitment from the very get-go assumed, and it's super unhelpful. And I don't think there's any room for it biblically either, to assume that what we have in the West right now has a parallel that you can extrapolate across the board. And so I think that having the freedom to pursue people just because they're interesting and then make a decision from there can go a long ways. And I think a lot of Christians need to hear that, because it doesn't need to be this hi, would you like to go get coffee with me? Also, what do you think about weddings in February?
Right. So that's
great advice, Dawes, because there's so much pre-filtering going on, or pre-vetting, like you term it. Guys try to overanalyze, before even approaching if she meets the criteria. So I think that's great advice that a lot of guys need to hear. Just get out there and talk and meet the girls.
Yeah. So some of this is the sniper versus shotgun approach that we talk about, right? You don't want to be fixated on one person and get stuck in this dead end relationship where you wasted 2 years because you were planning your marriage from the get-go, even before you knew whether or not you even liked the person. And so at some point we want to make sure that we're taking on that more shotgun mentality of saying, hey, let's get a lot of people in our sphere. Let's learn what we like, what we don't like. Let's get to know people and allow the relationship to form after we've had this idea of what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so in that, and women are really good at this, by the way. Generally, we always talk about how women have orbiters, and they love to have all these men in their sphere who are trying to vie for their affection. And at the same time, I try to encourage men to develop their own sets of orbiters within the context of their mission, right? You're doing something for God, you're making disciples. And the easiest thing, maybe I should let Mark be the one to answer this, but what have I advised you in the past about how to approach the missional context of building orbiters?
I would say taking that shotgun approach, meeting as many people as you can in as many different situations that you appear in, like in a grocery store, right? You just say hey to a bunch of people next to you, right? Or you're in the gym, or you're at church, right? So I think of growing that sphere of influence and starting to actually get connected and grow your network. It keeps exponentially growing. That's when you'll be able to actually kind of start collecting orbiters, just like any sales funnel would be. This is kind of works kind of the same way, right?
Right. So who's the Great Commission directed toward? Who's the object of that commission? Go therefore and make disciples of
all nations.
All men, right? No. Right, all nations. And so included in all nations is who?
All the nations.
All the nations.
Right. I know where Oz is going with this. But we'll have to account for women in that circle, right? You can't, and it's very clear from scripture, we talk about in RPC, we've had some conversations on this not too long ago about, older women train the younger women toward this and that, right? And so there's this idea that we're always supposed to be passing on what we've learned into the future generations. And as guys, I'm going to connect best with other dudes when it comes to making disciples. Not to say that you can't disciple a woman, works just fine. Every married guy should be, in some sense, discipling his wife. But when it comes to getting the gospel out to all nations, it's easy for us as guys to talk about, hey, let's be leaders within the church to be able to accomplish this. But how are we going to get it out to the other half of the population, right? I think actually it's like 51 point something % is women. And so to me, it makes the most sense that we just say, all right, well, we got to have women helping us. And so if my mission is to fulfill the Great Commission, however you want to interpret that, whether that's Oz's let's disciple nations collectively versus people within those nations, either way, those are big undertakings. And it's something, especially in a modern culture, if you want to accomplish that, it would not be ideal or even possible, I think, within the context of how God envisioned things, if we're only targeting men ever. And so in that sense, it's, especially if you want to get a congregation on board, goodness, let's get some women who can help mentor and train those other women who I'm not going to spend my time on because, one, I'm married and it would be awkward. Two, there's all kinds of taboo that the church is going to push back on because of the concept of a guy discipling a woman. And so if there is a way that I can get women on board in my mission, why not do it? And so for a single guy especially, the way that you bring other women into your mission and say, look, I'm making disciples, do you want to join me in this process? Let's get it done. And that's going to be where he's going to be able to be most effective in meeting women, not only just generally getting them in his sphere, but also being able to find women who have the same passion and mission and who are going to be helpful, because even before they start the relationship, he's already got networks and contacts of women who are ready to say, yes, I love this disciple making thing. Let's do it. Let's put it together in our congregation. And what better way to vet somebody than to find that they're on board with your mission even before you start?
And even then, you're killing two birds with one stone, right? Being able to talk with a bunch of women and also possibly find ones who you can bring into your mission, right?
Right.
So I will about building sphere of influence. That's a pretty good way to do it.
What's that?
So you talked about, Mark talked about building a sphere of influence. It's a pretty cool way to do it. Right. And it would be interesting if we were to have done this before the church and feminism and everything kind of derailed down to its current path, right? So I don't know that I would be giving the exact same speech if we were talking 2,000 years ago, but given the current culture of things, I think that that's essentially an imperative if you want to be able to have any meaningful influence in a structural sense. What were you saying though, Oz? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say too, I want to address another point in which I think affects singles quite a bit. I have a couple buddies. In fact, I'll think about two of them in mind right now. One of them, he needs to work on like lifting and being attractive on a physical level, etc. The other one is the opposite in that he has no trouble attracting women. Both of them find it very challenging to find any woman that is worth their time. We live in a very secular area, and so it's just very challenging to find someone. I think that there's some answers here that I could guess at, like what John would say, for example. But what do we give advice for those guys? Those guys out there who they're getting their stuff together and they're just finding it really challenging to even be around women that are worth their time.
Just because the quality of women are pretty low? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Got it. Not everybody at once. You all know my answer, so I'm not going to answer first.
Yeah, that's why I pre-qualified it with you on that one.
Well, and I think there's a difference between who you're going to disciple and who is going to be a potential candidate for you to be with. And I think they don't have to be mutually exclusive. One could be practice for the other, but by discipling different people, you're going to be making an impact on them spiritually anyway. If you're discipling women, then you're going to hopefully bring some spiritual teaching and improvement into their lives. Does that mean that's going to make them better candidates for dating and possibly marriage? Oh, maybe not. Maybe so. You never know. But the practice is good, because I'll tell you, when I respond to women on RPC, Ask RPC, and occasionally on RPW, it's not quite the same. It does take a different approach. I do get different responses. I find a less straightforward approach, a less direct and harsh approach does seem to resonate better and get better results, at least from the typed responses that I get. So I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen for a lot of men, because we do tend to focus on discipling men mostly. For me, discipling women is rather new. And I'll admit, I don't always know how to bridge that gap very well.
Right, and you won't see the fruit be born right away, right? Like that takes time. So even when you are kind of helping women in some way, you might not see any change then, but God willing, there might be later, right? And that's kind of like what making disciples is right. As we mature in our faith, God can help us move others towards maturing in their faith as well, right?
Yes, anytime I give advice, I figure I'm planting a seed. It's up to God to make that grow. And I'm not out there looking for somebody to date and marry, because I'm married, so I don't have that to worry about. I can speak freely and say what I think, but I realize the way I say it is often as or more important than what I'm actually saying when it comes to discipling women. And if I want to do the best job of making an impact, then I have to have a bit of a different approach, and that takes work. That's something that I'm still not completely sure how to do very well.
Right. So I think we're out of time for this session. Do you guys want to stick around and record a second, or call it for the night?
I could hang out for a little while. Can't be a super long one.
Yeah,
sounds good to me.
Available.
All right, let's go ahead and cut off, and we will rejoin the group.